everyone. Welcome to this episode of Enterprise Alchemy. As always, I'm Ant. Today, joined by Cathy Acratopulo.
Perfect.
Did I get that right?
Perfect, Ant.
Yes.
There you go. 10 out of 10.
Yes, managing director, Lace partner. So you really got your finger on the pulse of what's going on, right, in the world of HR and chief people officers.
I try to, absolutely, and hopefully we can share a bit of that today.
Absolutely. I think you're far too modest. The conversations we've had, I'm like, wow, okay, you spend a lot of time in this, you know this well. So getting straight to it then, you're on a mission to demystify the HR operating model.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So in terms of, if you're a chief people officer and HR leader, you're there to achieve business outcomes, right?
Yeah.
You're a commercial people officer. You are there with the C-suite, helping a business achieve its goals. And I guess when you try and interpret those business goals into people outcomes, what does that actually mean? You know, what are you actually needing to deliver relating to people over the next few years that will achieve those business goals? And when you look at what it is that you need to deliver, how are you set up to deliver that as a function? So as a CPO, you know, you have multiple hats. One of those is to run the function, the HR function, just as a CFO would run the finance function.
Yep.
And so if you think about that from the perspective of what does that really mean, when you look at your HR operating model, is it aligned to those business goals?
Okay.
So how can you ensure that you are set up to achieve those outcomes in the most successful way possible? And what business context are you operating in? And how would that determine why you would do things differently as a function?
Okay. So, so the operating model is, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, essentially how we set up to deliver the service that we offer to our internal customers in a way that aligns to the goals of the business.
Exactly. And when we say set up, you know, you naturally think structure.
Yes,
right?
I was going to, that was my next question. Okay, go on. Yeah.
So you naturally think, what does that mean in terms of the roles and how they report and how we align what we're doing structurally? But actually, that's just one part of the operating model.
Okay.
So if you think about it more broadly, it actually means more around capabilities. So what capabilities, not at an individual level, but actually at an organizational level, do you need as a function to deliver those people outcomes? What does it mean in terms of your ways of working and your mindset? So actually, what sort of attitude do you need as an HR function and as a set of HR professionals to deliver those people outcomes? And what does it mean and how does it tie to the employee experience that you're trying to deliver for that business?
Okay, yeah, this is something we're hearing more and
exactly.
more about.
And we know, right now that commercially as a business, you know, you're going to be under a lot of pressure to attract and retain talent. And we can dig into why that is, but there are a lot of factors driving that pressure. And therefore the HR function is a key driver of the employee experience. It's not the only driver, but it has a big influence over the employee experience. So actually as an HR operating model question is, what is that employee experience you're looking to deliver? And do you have the right capabilities as a function, the right way of delivering services? Are you focused on the right things that drive those employee experience outcomes that enable you to both attract people into your business, but once they're there, ensure they're having a great time so that they stay?
Okay. So then I know we've spoken about this previously, and I thought this is a really, I mean, it's something you mentioned just off the cuff, but I was like, oh yeah, I've never thought about it in that. And that's what I find interesting when you have conversations with people who are really across their stuff. They'll mention things and you go, wow, that's a real nugget of gold. So we were talking about what's happened in terms of the broader economic context. And, you know, beyond, we've had COVID, yes, you know, we had this kind of zero interest rate environment and all of these types of things. And just tell us about what you were seeing in terms of that common thread of the labor market that's driving the need for these different, if you like, HR operating models that are addressing different things and driving the real need for employee experience.
Yeah. Okay. So look, lots of things have happened that actually have meant that there is a very different set of demands around employee experience. Employees have very different expectations of what work should be for them and how they should feel at work and the support they need at work compared to maybe 5 years ago. Right. And clearly the pandemic was a big part of that. It effectively was sort of an accelerator
Yes.
around things like well-being, for example, and also hybrid working, right? A lot of different changes and different expectations as a result of what people want when they actually choose their job, okay? And that choose is important to emphasize, because actually it has been the employee's choice, because we've had a labour market that is effectively in full employment for a long time. We're sub 5% unemployment at the moment still. We've got the challenges of talent supply routes not being as fruitful as they used to be. So Brexit has had an impact on that. Where you source your people from has changed if you're a UK-based business. And you've also got the challenge of an aging population.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have, instances where now we know that there's the economically inactive, as they're calling them, which is a delightful phrase, but basically people who are not in work. And for a variety of reasons, that number is higher than ever before. Yeah. So when you're trying to source individuals for roles, you're fishing from a smaller pond. Okay, so therefore, even though we've been in, an economic downturn, typically you'd say then actually the power shifts to the employer, right?
Yes,
in terms of actually being able to pick and choose who they want and are in control of their workforce.
Yeah.
Actually, the power is still rested with the employee.
Right.
And therefore, even in economic downturn, organizations have had to really reflect on how do we differentiate our employee experience so that we can still attract and retain, because we have a smaller pool to fish from. And actually, are we closing ourselves off to different sources of talent by focusing in a more traditional space than maybe, and maybe we need to open and broaden that in terms of where we source our people. So that's where the emphasis has come on employee experience. And when you think about what is the value proposition of working somewhere, your EVP, your employee value proposition, that's the promise, if you like, what you're setting out as your promise to new people coming in. But then it's the employee experience is the reality. Okay. Yeah. And so when you promise something, when someone reads a job advert or has interviews or speaks to a headhunter or whatever it is, and they get a series of promises, how do you actually stack up against those promises once someone's in and working with you? And that employee experience, how purposeful are you around ensuring that's designed well and delivered well? That bit is what differentiates the ability to attract and retain talent. And because of the labour market circumstances, the ability to do that really well is now a real competitive differentiator and a driver of business success more than it's ever been before, which means that chief people officers, HR leaders now need to take more ownership of that and drive it in a more purposeful way than they have ever done before.
Right. Okay, there's tons of stuff in there. So let me just see if I'm following the track. Yeah. So we've had lots of different economic circumstances, including the pandemic and things which are shaking up the way we work.
Yep.
But flowing through this, the sort of the labour market constant has been at or near full employment, which means, therefore, that it is an employee's market. People's values as well are shifting.
Yep.
So then it's a question of saying, well, I can choose where I work because there's not a whole lot more people that you can suddenly tip into the bucket. And so given that's the case, C-level, the CEOs are saying from the chief people officers, look, we need a way of getting the people from that pond that maybe, is smaller, so that they don't go down the road. Therefore, just like you would a product where you have to sell that product to the market and you make your promises in your marketing and everything else, and then once people experience the product, that has to follow through. Exactly. So there's essentially the employee experience component is, okay, well, how do we make those promises a reality so that we can get first pick?
Exactly. And the analogy you're making around product is really interesting, right? Because the disciplines that you have around customer experience, so from a marketing function or product development function, a business that is product-based or customer service-based, probably already taking this approach for their customer experience, is taking those disciplines and that thoughtfulness and that purposeful approach and applying that to the employee experience.
Love it. This is one thing I've often thought with, and not just HR, but shared services in general.
Absolutely.
Is saying, could there be a benefit of adopting a more product development, and customer-centric mindset, because that also includes things like, well, go and ask them.
Yeah.
See what they need, see what they want, use that feedback, be more agile. So if that is where things are moving, because we've kind of got this big economic thing up here of full labor market employment, why are the current HR operating models not delivering to that change in circumstance?
Yeah, and I think there's another set of factors that we need to consider about having the most effective operating model for the HR function. One is absolutely, are you delivering on the employee experience that you really need as a business, and have you got the right capabilities to do that? There's also the business context, right? So is your business actually a business that's going through huge amounts of change, and therefore there's a quest for agility, if you like, and your operating model needs to be able to support and enable that. Is your business going through rapid growth? Mm-hmm. And that will have implications for your operating model. Is your business actually a really customer-centric business? And therefore, how does your operating model ensure that you're delivering, from a people point of view, people who are obsessing about the customer experience and see their employee experience reflective of the customer experience? So, and there's lots of different angles there for the business context. I think the challenge we have when you're a chief people officer or an HR leader and you're trying to proactively think about your HR operating model is you've probably got a sort of, there's a relatively standard operating model out there, right, which most people have in place when they're relatively large businesses, which is sort of Dave Ulrich's operating model, which basically says that you have HR business partners.
Yep.
You've centralized operational HR into shared services,
mm-hmm.
and you have centers of expertise who are your specialists, if you like, advising on policy and strategy around things like talent or performance or reward. And that's your archetypal sort of operating model that you'll be familiar with, right? And that's what most organizations have. And that may well be working, but it's not so much those concepts. It's actually the skills and capability and mindset that you have within that operating model that will enable you to be more effective when it comes to driving agility or driving growth or driving customer centricity within your business, or in businesses that are focused on productivity. You would dial up or dial down aspects of that model to suit that scenario.
Okay.
So I think when you look at HR operating models, we've gone down a sort of one-size-fits-all approach of COEs, HR shared services, business partnering, and it doesn't have the nuance, maybe the tailoring that takes account of, firstly, your employee experience you're looking to deliver, and secondly, the business context you're operating within.
So that's a really interesting one, that business context question.
Yeah.
Because, and look, there's various views on, I see stuff out there on LinkedIn, looking at it from both sides, but is there a drive, I think, for HR to better understand, like, rather than just being, okay, we're a shared service, we do HR things, so we look to other HR functions, and that's where we get our inspiration, right? Or HR best practice, versus saying, you really need to understand the business, how you make money, what your values are, and not just what they are on the wall, but what's actually getting driven in the business, and understanding those goals and supporting that. So are you seeing that that's a continuing trend of saying, well, I suppose to your point of, you need, without the business context, you can't just do HR stuff and hope that it's going to work.
Yeah.
Or at least it's suboptimal.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that drive for more commerciality in HR, I guess that commercial thinking, is one of the sort of common challenges that we come up against around ensuring that when we're helping our clients work through, how they can be more effective, more efficient as HR functions, how they, a big question is always from us, what are the business goals and how you align to those? And that commerciality is something that CPOs now, because in my view, CPOs have had that opportunity to step up and be far more commercial and bottom line driven because of the accelerators we talked about around pandemic and the economic environment. You can drive so much value now through the people or the HR function more than you ever could before. So the opportunity is there. You're pushing on an open door, right, in terms of having commercial conversations with your business C-suite team. So I think from that point of view, being able to put a commercial value on what you do in HR is really important. I think when we think about what's the purpose of the HR function, I think then we get into quite an interesting conversation, right? Because absolutely, to your point, shared services, being a service expert is the table stakes, right?
Right. Yeah. The ticket to the game.
Exactly. Yeah. And unless you are a service expert, you're probably going to struggle to get involved in any more of the strategic commercial value adding stuff, because if you can't pay people well, you can't recruit the right numbers, or the experience, of ringing up for advice from HR is poor, then what mandate do you have to do anything more transformational?
Okay, gotcha.
Right. So to me, that's one hat, if you like. If you're a chief people officer or an HR leader, you're wearing multiple hats. That's a core one. You need to be an HR service expert, not you personally, but your function. Right. So 24/7, always on, great advice, efficient ways of delivering services. You get consistency. You get a great customer experience of using HR services. So that's one hat, but there's multiple others as well.
Okay. Thank you, because that was going to be my next question. So I've seen you talk about this a bit.
Yeah.
The 4 hats.
Yes.
Of the CPO. So if one is, we've really, like you said, table stakes, we got to just do what it says on the tin.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds to me like there's then a gap, if you like, between there and truly having a seat at the table. That reasons for that may be different, business to business. But in terms of now going to that level and understanding these 4 hats, what are the other 3 hats that the CPO wears and why?
Okay. So let's assume HR service expert is a given.
Okay. Yes.
Right? Yep. Got to be great at that as a function.
Yep.
The others are much more of the commercial angle. Okay. So the second hat that we talk about is the transformation enabler. Okay. So as a HR function, as a CPO, you are driving change in the business. So how, we know that change, fine, you're implementing a new system or a new business structure or whatever it is, but actually unless you're shifting the people with you, the change will not land. Okay. So actually as a transformation enabler, as an HR leader, how do you deliver that transformation support? How do you make it happen for the business? That change may be led by HR, it may be led by the business, but either way, HR has a pivotal role in making that successful. So what capabilities, roles, support do you provide to the business that enables them to transform? So that's another hat. Right?
Okay. Yeah. And that's, gosh, we could go down the well on that one. That in itself is a complex,
absolutely
gnarly issue. Okay.
But doing that well is where you drive the bottom line value. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that to me is a big commercial element of the capabilities you need as an HR function.
Okay. So that basically if I'm understanding correctly, so the change will stick.
Exactly.
And not essentially, if it's a project, let's say, that it will deliver the intended benefits on time and to the budget.
Yeah, quite. Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. So another hat is a bit linked to what we were talking around business goals and employee experience outcomes. You are the employee experience architect. Right. So you may not be accountable for everyone's experience at work. We know that actually a lot of people's experience at work is driven primarily by their line manager. Right.
Yeah.
I know that's a favorite topic.
Yes.
We can dig into that one if you want to. But so you may not be able to, you're not accountable as a function for line managers, for example, but you're certainly a key facilitator and driver of what makes great line management. Similarly, across the whole employee experience, everything from hire to retire, everything in terms of the work environment, the digital tools you have to do your job, the leadership, the values, the culture of the organization, all of that influences your experience of work. So you may not own it all as a people function or an HR function, but you absolutely need to architect it. So take a purposeful approach to architecting that experience, understand where you are now, understand what you need to change to drive a better experience and put commercial value to that. Why would we do that? How would it help us attract and retain talent? How would it make people more positive, more productive in their work? Because that drives value. Okay. So that architecture role around the employee experience is so important. And as part of that, you also need really effective listening strategies around how you are understanding how people are feeling. So experience architect is another of the hats.
Okay. So we've got the table stakes, do the stuff you're supposed to do, help the change help facilitate that change and transformation where it's necessary. And I like how you talk about be the architect, because that talks more to the design and creating the conditions, and creating something that's possible and buildable. but not saying HR has to own it all, because this is another thing I often see HR functions overwhelmed with stuff. And it's, to my mind, is, moving as much as possible to self-managing teams. And not that everything can be self-managing. I don't think that's realistic or feasible, but just to take some of the heat off, if
Absolutely.
you like. So, and then as well, if those issues are being dealt with in an employee experience context, as you said, it is a hobby horse of mine, the whole line manager, and the role that, I suppose the organizational climate plays on the psychology of an individual. And so, but there's as a HR function, you can't be there every day. So it's, how do we create those conditions? So if we've got those three pieces, what's the last bit?
So the last one is compliance champion.
Okay.
Right. So, and that covers a variety of areas, but ultimately HR is also there to make sure it keeps the organization out of trouble, right? In terms
on the right
of,
side,
on the right side
yeah.
of the policies, frameworks, legal environments that they're working in their multiple geographies. As, again, table stakes job, right? You need to get that right. But it's broader than that. It's also, the HR function will run, ensure, lots of reporting and compliance roles around things like equal pay, things like your REMCO, how you assess pay every year for the senior team. There's a compliance role there, but there is also this enablement of the business to ensure that they understand what good looks like, and they understand and they feel confident about managing that employee-employer relationship. And that you've also got the right frameworks around employee relations in the business. So whether you're in a unionized business or not, you still need to listen, discuss, understand the employee voice, and drive that sort of drive the most effective relationship between the employee and the employer. So that compliance champion bit often gets missed, if you like, but you need to do that really well as well. And ultimately, if something blows up, right? Where's it going to land when you look around the C-suite? If it's a people-related issue and something has hit the newspapers or has become a big topic and it's people-related, you as CPO may well be ultimately seen as accountable for making sure that we do better.
Okay. So, yeah, I got you. And I like how you say, it's the championing the compliance, but making, like you said, making sure you don't get in hot water, or adverse publicity as well is can be a killer. I mean, I've seen some of the stuff recently in the news and things about, like, it's just, dealing with that stuff is a nightmare, and it's reputational damage.
Absolutely.
So what I'm sort of hearing is, look, you need those pieces. You need the compliance, stay on the right side of the law. You need the HR service. But then there's real business value drivers there as well, and understanding how to drive the change, and how to make sure that employees are getting the best experience they can.
Exactly. And what's interesting, when we've tested those hats we have a network of CPOs across multiple industries, different size businesses, and we sort of tested those hats with them to see how much it resonated, and they all resonated. They all felt that they all recognized all four.
Yeah.
And they also said that in a single day, I could be wearing each of those hats every day. Right.
Okay.
So the variety of the role is what attracts a lot of people into it, right? Because it is a really broad leadership role. Yeah. But the one thing they added, which I thought was really interesting, and a good shout, was actually, what about the head that wears the hats? Because actually, as a CPO, as an individual, as opposed to the function, you tend to have a unique role when it comes to maybe being your cultural conscience for the organization. So you are the person who is interacting with the leaders of the business on a regular basis. You're probably being, the person who's being sought out for providing a bit of one-on-one counsel to C-suite members, the CEO, the CFO, whoever it is. And therefore, you've got this real independent role and a challenge role around how true are we when we say these are our cultural values, how well are we aligning to that? And probably the best person around that table to hold the mirror up, awful consulting term, but hold the mirror up and say, actually, did we do the right thing there? And I think that cultural conscience and coach, if you like, to the C-suite is an individual aspect of the CPO role, which we can sometimes forget, but it actually is a really critical and quite individual aspect of being successful in that job.
So given all that stuff, how do you choose? Like, how do you align and arrange this stuff around? Is it like, how do you do it? What do you see works? Is it just, hey, let's understand the business goals and then we'll just sort of arrange everything else that fits around that within those four hats, or is there some other way?
It always starts, in my view, with the business strategy. What is it you're really trying to achieve over the next few years?
Yeah.
And how do you interpret that into a set of really tangible people outcomes? And those people outcomes need to be agreed across the leadership of the business, not just within the HR function. So if you've got alignment on the people outcomes, then the next logical question is, how do we as a function in HR set ourselves up to deliver those? So if the people outcomes are agreed and the business won't be arguing with them, they know that's what you're there to do. How do we achieve it? And to address that, you need to say also, what context are we operating in within the business?
Okay.
So back to those different sort of business lenses. Are we a business that's focused on productivity? Are we a business that's focused on growth? Are we looking for agility? Are we actually, obsessing about the customer? And each of those will mean that you would drive different capabilities and maybe different aspects of your operating model to address them.
Okay.
So I can give you an example.
Yeah, go on, please.
Okay, so if we take a business that's really focused on productivity, so maybe a retailer, right? Someone who's working on really low margins as a business. The first thing that a retail CPO is likely to think about or want to get right is pay. Okay, because that's going to be for, a business that's operating in 20, 30, 40,000 employees. Small changes in pay when you're on low margin businesses can have a massive difference on business success. Okay, so having the right capability around advising on reward and reward strategy is going to be critical. Again, with the relationship with the employee and the employer and how you achieve the right pay changes every year as well, and how much control you have over that will be a critical factor of the sort of capabilities you'd want to build into your HR function. Similarly, you might be in a situation where you're expanding in a retail environment. Also, we know there's a challenge of finding enough people to fill frontline jobs in retail settings. Same in hospitality right now. So your talent attraction capability needs to be really strong. So how do we recruit the right type of people where we need them, and with the right skills and attitude to be our front line to our retail customers? Okay, so that link back then to our talent attraction capability. And then similarly, you're probably also focused on the customer experience in a retail setting. So how do you drive a brilliant customer experience, employee experience that will deliver a good customer experience? And this is equally relevant in hospitality. If you or I walked into a coffee shop and we had awful service, we probably wouldn't go back to that coffee shop. But why was that individual not on their A game that day, right? That might have been because they didn't get paid on time, or they were asked to turn up for a shift at late notice because the operational system that did shifts got it wrong. Or they might just have had a really bad chat with the store manager, right? They just may not get on. There's lots of things there that HR can influence that drives the link between customer experience and employee experience. So having a really strong capability in that as well. And then the final area, if in a productivity business, is going to be very metrics driven. So how have you got the data, the insights, the real-time information that can help you make better decisions about how you're staffing your stores, how people are performing, so that those small margins become optimized?
I love it. And thank you as well. So some of the big consulting firms, right? So when I read their reports and things, because, I kind of have to, I suppose, to understand, well, what are they saying? Because often people then say, well, they said this. So, and if I'm being honest, I find a lot of it is so abstract and fluff that I go through 50 pages and I'm like, I'm none the wiser as to, other than some general concepts, I'm none the wiser as to how this works. Now, what I like about the way you're thinking about this, you're starting it with, what problem are we trying to solve here? So rather than, here's all the things, that's great, all the stuff we could do, but what we are going to do is really going to be centered around the problem we're trying to solve.
Absolutely.
And to me, that clarity and that goal clarity is then the thing that then all the priorities can cascade off, and it makes it just easy.
Well, hopefully. Certainly, my team will tell you they get fed up with me always coming back to what's the exam question.
Yeah.
What's the exam question we're trying to solve for? It's the same with the HR operating model. What are we trying to achieve?
Yeah.
That's why it needs to start with the business goals and the business context.
Yeah.
Drive the employee experience conversation and then work out what does that mean for the capabilities and the way we're set up to deliver that experience and those people outcomes. And it may well not change the fact you've got business partners, centers of expertise or shared services.
But at least you've thought through it in the
what
context.
they're doing and how they're doing it and the mindset they're doing it with and the focus they have on things like the impact on the customer experience will drive change.
Yeah. That makes total sense to me. I love it. It's a simple way to think about it. And if I can get my head around it and summarize it, then I'm like, okay, yep. I use slightly different verbiage to you, but I'm always saying, and my co-founder is always, what problem are you trying to solve here? Right? Let's every time, because then you need that North Star, because then you can keep coming back to it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, things get convoluted and complicated real quick, and then you're having to decide between all these things, and you say, well, I need some way of deciding. So the easiest thing, let's go back to the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
So as we're now like moving towards the end, the one question I'd ask, the trends, I know AI and stuff comes up a lot. I got kind of mixed feelings on that. I think definitely can be helpful to automate repetitive tasks. I don't think the robots are going to take over the world anytime soon. I think it's in the major hype cycle at the moment. I'm sure companies are thinking about it, but from the CPO and HR function, what are the big, aside from what we've talked about, are there any other big trends and things that you're seeing?
Yeah, and I think it's something we get asked a lot, right? And there is a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of information. It changes by the day.
It does, yeah.
And staying on top of that is really hard.
Yeah.
And we know that the pace and scale of how we use AI will, already on a high speed sort of high speed trajectory, but that's only going to increase. And so staying on top of it is really hard. So I guess from a CPO point of view, what we experience with our clients is that they're looking at it from two perspectives. One is actually, what does AI mean for our business in terms of skills, capabilities, roles, how we can drive efficiency? What will it mean we need in our workforce in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time compared to what we need now? And how do we interpret that from a sort of strategic workforce plan point of view?
Okay.
So that's a big challenge, right? Because no one really knows where this is going.
Yeah.
But staying up to date, informed as much as you can, and understanding the impact on the types of jobs you need, the types of skills you need, and also just having that capability in your business, not just in HR, but in your business, to stay on top of what's happening in AI. Right. That's a critical area. The second thing is, what does it mean for the function itself? So how can HR use AI to improve the employee experience, drive efficiencies, to your point, automate tasks that are more repetitive, give information to line managers, to employees at their fingertips, rather than having to engage directly with a person in HR, right? So how can you leverage those tools? And I think that is a really interesting side of it as well. A lot of the big HR tech vendors are already investing a lot of money into how they can improve their own systems and leverage AI. So for those big clients who've already got big tech systems in place, they'll be seeing a lot of change coming through because it's SaaS-based software, right? So they'll just get the updates and it will give them the opportunity. But it's actually maybe how you can use AI to innovate and differentiate in the employee experience that I'm particularly excited about. So when you need help, if you're a people manager and you need help on addressing a particular challenge, how can you get that to the fingertips of that people manager when they need it?
Yeah.
And, in based on their prompts, their scenarios, give them the right advice, maybe much quicker than we could do before. That to me is a real game changer.
I've seen some crazy tech actually in that space. So that's where I do think you're right. But I think it's, to me, I suppose, I'd come back to, right, what's the use case? What's the problem here? Does it fit? Rather than, because I also have seen implementation, not necessarily in the HRIS space, but in the, like the CRM space probably. And I'm like, Yeah, it's an AI feature. Interesting, but it's not that useful. You've plopped it in there.
Yeah.
And people are experimenting. I think it's about the experimentation process as well that will whittle it away till eventually they understand what the use case is. But I like that it's, you got to monitor it, stay on top of it. Because I think people need to just be careful. Don't jump in and just throw money. Well, unless you can.
Yeah.
But in general, just be diligent.
Absolutely. And your point around innovating, trying things out, testing stuff is a really good one. I think there's a lot of products out there. There's a lot of offerings out there. And it's, being able to choose something that works for you and aligns to your business goals, I think is really important. But it comes back to one of the traits of what leading people functions do, right? We have 10 traits of leading people functions. One of them is continuous improvement. To me, this is part of the continuous improvement cycle. Okay. So test things out, try things, have the right mechanisms in place to put some guardrails around it and pilot and try things out, be agile, and accept that you're not going to get it right every time, but learn from it and move on and try again. So don't necessarily jump in and put all your eggs in one basket with one type of product.
Yeah, right.
Try different things and have the agility to do it, but try and mitigate the risk. And as you said, have a clear value case about why there will be value at the end of the day here for the business.
I love it. Eminently sensible. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this episode of Enterprise Alchemy. Cathy, thank you so much for joining me today. And I mean, it's just crazy how the depth of you just straight off the top of your head.
There you go. Yeah, 10 years in this business.
I was going to say, you live it clearly.
Far too many years before that.
You clearly live and breathe
HR.
it. So thanks for sharing. I think it's and it simple, clear, concise. I think it's great.
Well, really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Ant.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. All right, guys, stay tuned. We will see you on the next one.